Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for your continued support. One of the greatest things that I've had the opportunity to do is through this community is a silver lining, which is meeting people, not only families, organizations, but also doctors, scientists, researchers, people that are helping make moves in this community. And as you know, we do hold most of the weight of the world on our shoulders as we hope that at some point our government will catch up with us and help us out in this movement. My guest today is somebody that I have not actually had the chance to meet in person because our schedules never seem to line up, but we have spoken and she's been very generous with her time. And I was able to hear her speak at CureFest a few years ago as part of the Biden Moonshot program. So today, my guest is Dr. Catharine Young. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Curtis, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. It's my honor to have you. So I want you to kind of tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll kind of go into your background and how we've come to cross paths.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me take a step back to way back in my life. I was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa, during a really difficult time period in history. I was raised through apartheid, which for many of your listeners may know was a very deep humanitarian crisis in the country. And I not only was raised during that time, but also got to see the end of it with the election of Nelson Mandela, and got to see what happens when collectively we can change the way things are done when they're not working. And I think that really started to, set the stage for my career of thinking and trying to solve really big problems, particularly when it comes to systems that just don't work for the people that they're meant to be serving. And so when I kind of reflect back on my journey, I think that was a critical part to the way that I started to think about what's important in my life. And certainly that meant my career too. So I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in biomedical sciences, and I did postdoctorate work in biomedical engineering because I gravitated towards, again, the idea of solving really hard and complex problems. But I soon realized kind of throughout my academic career that there was so much to be done outside of the four walls of a lab that I felt I was really drawn to. And so even though I loved science and I loved the process of discovery and the scientific method of asking really critical questions and trying to get to those answers, I started to understand that for me, my career, it was really important to step outside of academia and to start to tackle really hard questions that would have a much quicker impact for the people that I would be serving. And so my journey kind of post scientific career really touched on a number of things, including working for both the U.S. government as well as a foreign government. I worked for the British Embassy as a science advisor for the UK ambassador. And then my foray into kind of the cancer world occurred when I was hired as the senior policy director at the Biden Cancer Initiative, which was then former vice president's nonprofit he started after the end of the Obama-Biden administration. And of course, many of your listeners will know that the first Cancer Moonshot actually started back right at the end of 2016, and this was a continuation of that work. So I was really so fortunate to be able to step into this world where, of course, as we both know and your listeners know, such an incredibly complex disease that affects, all of us in some capacities, some much more than others. And so I've spent probably now for almost the last decade really focused on cancer and trying to help solve some of those big problems that we know exist when it comes to fighting this disease.
Absolutely. And I want to hear and kind of understand more about what the internal thought process behind what the initiative, the Moonshot program, what it was and what it chose to tackle. And I'll preface this by saying that when Biden was elected, so in his term when he was elected, and the Moonshot program was, kind of reintroduced and put out there. And in all honesty and transparency, I criticized it. And I only did that because I was reading through it, what was put out on the White House page and things like that. And in my position, the first thing I did was I did a search on kids, pediatrics, childhood, anything within it, right?
Yeah.
Because research, I think all of us can understand, especially, listeners in our community, is that pediatric cancer and adult cancers are different. They're treated different. They're diagnosed differently. They're all in every aspect of it. So when I searched and couldn't find anything, I was extremely critical. And, I know it kind of all comes together under kind of one big, umbrella and things like that. But when we don't see specific focus, we tend to think we're being left behind. So I'm curious on what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, of course. So I'll just take a step back and talk about the mission that the Cancer Moonshot set out to tackle, and then we'll dive down a little bit deeper. But essentially, it came with two main goals. The first was to reduce the cancer death rate here in the United States by half over the next 25 years. And the second was to improve the experience of those living with and surviving cancer. And of course, that meant everybody touched by cancer, whether you were an adult, a pediatric patient, whether you were a family member or caretaker. I mean, we both know that when somebody is diagnosed with cancer, it is not a solo disease. There are so many people impacted by it in the family circle. So collectively, yes, while we didn't specifically pull out pediatrics, of course, children were an incredible core part of what we were trying to solve for in terms of the disease. We then had 5 different pillars that we focused on. And so I think there were several kind of cross-cutting things in these pillars, but I think pediatric cancer actually fell in all of them, which is why we didn't just pull out pediatric cancer, because honestly, it was, like I said, embedded in everything that we were trying to push forward for. Understanding, of course, as you mentioned, pediatric cancers and children face different obstacles, but that didn't mean that we weren't aware of that or that we weren't trying to solve for those issues as well. So our kind of focus really went from prevention all the way through survivorship, as well as the support for the broader community as well. And then, of course, within that, as work unfolded, pediatric cancer was something that we always had on the table pushing forward, whether that was convenings that we had at the White House that was specific for childhood cancers, whether that was making sure that we were making connections behind the scenes to unblock regulatory pathways or to accelerate research or to advocate for research funding when it came to children. This is something we did every day of our time there, even though not everything that we did obviously was going to be visible to the communities. But I do hope that the childhood cancer community felt supported, because one of the things that I think looking back, I am so proud of the team itself, was that they never closed themselves off. They did not want to seem as like an entity in the White House that was untouchable. We really made every effort to ensure we were connected with the communities and understood and talked to people to ensure that what we were hearing from the community was being taken back by us and then kind of infused into the work streams and the policies that we were trying to push forward as well. So I totally understand where you're coming from, to be honest, and I get that frustration, but do know that childhood cancers and the children and the stories that we heard every day is what was driving us to make sure that we were accelerating progress as quickly as we could have.
Thank you. And I want to touch on one thing too. We have, when you talk about accessibility and listening to the community and things like that, personally, obviously between yourself and I, you worked in the White House is kind of like that pinnacle of achievement for a parent and advocate to either be there or be connected to that, which is supposed to kind of define our democracy, right? And our world. And to be able to, for you to take the time to respond. I mean, I reached out on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and you responded to me very quickly. And I want to take the opportunity to tell you that I appreciate the fact that you spent that time to talk to me. We had a call soon after that and spoke about it, and I was able to tell JC's story. And, I would love it still one day to be able to tell her story in those halls, not because because to be honest with you, I don't care who is in the big office. To me, it's always been about just making sure that these children have their voice heard, and DNR don't mean anything to me 100%. I was going to say that I try to keep politics out of what I do, but I don't. I am an equal opportunity going after people depending on how they choose to talk about kids and how they choose to either ignore or accept what's going on. And the pediatric cancer issue within our country, since our daughter was diagnosed in 2020 and, when she passed in 2021, the pediatric cancer problem from our side of it has gotten worse and not better. And we say that because there's a big number. We hear every day that's 43 kids a day, but it's now up to, I believe, 47. And that's not good. The diagnosis that now, could we take that as they're catching it sooner? They're catching it. You could look at it that way,
Yeah.
but the reality of it is that these children, and we just lost another one this week that, through our community that we follow. And there's more and more that are within hospice care that what's coming. And it's becoming, an issue for us to really hope that people in those high unattainable positions
Yeah.
see that it's an issue.
Yeah.
And it becomes something like, one advocacy thing for us is if you go into a politician's office, doesn't matter who they are, and they've got kids' pictures on their desk and say, we have the same pictures at home on our walls, and we were not these parents until the day we were.
Right.
And the biggest part about pediatric cancer is we don't understand why it happens. There's no, environmental factors maybe, but lifestyle, right? These kids with cancers that are related to drinking and smoking, that's obviously not what's happening.
Right.
And so why are these? Or our daughter with brain cancer, the brain cancer is the number one killer within the pediatric cancer community, but also the least funded and the least understood. And so we only aim to get the people in the higher unattainable positions to look down and say, yes, we are just these. Lately, we've been called average parents. Lately, we're just these average people that live average lives, that don't have connections, that are far beyond our communities, that just want to be heard and want our children's stories to be told.
Of course. And I will say that you are anything but average because, in my 10 years that I've been in this cancer world and have met thousands of advocates and patients and parents, I will tell you that there is no greater power than when you see parents who have gone through the most unimaginable pain somebody on this earth could probably experience, and turn that pain into the desire to see change happen so that no other child has to experience what their children went through. There is no greater power in that. And it was a privilege for us every day to be able to talk to people like you, because you were, and people and parents like you were the cornerstone of our work. You reminded us every day of the immense responsibility that we had to make sure that we were doing everything in our power to serve you in the best way that we could possibly do. I think what we saw in the last 4 years was what happens when you have leadership in the highest levels really care about something that affects everybody to the degree it does. And I think when we had a president who understood that pain as a parent of losing a child, that was the motivating force behind what we did, was to serve people like the president and like you, who had gone through the most unimaginable pain. And so just want to let you know that you absolutely were recognized and acknowledged. And it is because of your power and your stories that we really pushed and injected that urgency into our work, because you were, and quite frankly, the children are what matters the most. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And it's, all of the strength and power, motivation, determination, all of that, for us comes from our daughter, and it comes from these kids because, I've said it, if I've said it a time, I've said it a million times, that if anybody that doesn't understand kind of why we fight so hard, why we scream so loud, I want anybody in this world, whether you're connected to this or not, to spend 5 minutes with one of these children.
Absolutely.
Just allow them to speak to you. And I promise you, it will change your life. It'll change your perspective. There's just no other. These kids are genuine. These kids have innocence in their hearts. These kids don't know anything other than just to be kind. And to be honest with you, it's that combination that we're missing in this world so much right now.
I believe.
If you could just take that and just inject it in everybody, left, right, down the middle, around the world, it doesn't matter. Just inject that innocence and genuine and just be kind to people, because the reality of it is, a lot of these kids, not most of them, a lot of these kids, when they're going through this, you may not see changes physically on the outside. You may not see, and also, even if you do, they're always smiling because that's just who they are.
Yeah.
You never know what somebody's going through. The worst day in the world. I sat on the front of our house the day that our daughter passed. I sat there after they took her away, and I looked at my wife and I said, everybody's still sleeping on the street and nobody knows what just happened right next door. And that's just the reality of things. We have got to kind of get back into that. Our problems aren't worse than yours, but we all have things that we're going through. And we just have to kind of come together, all of us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Totally agree. They also, I think, reflect back to us the fragility of life and how often we can take that for granted when things are going okay, right? Like when we do have our health and our family members are not sick, it's one of the biggest things I think we take for granted. But having these children, having these patients and parents in our orbit, and understanding and hearing that pain that you went through and go through every day, probably for the rest of your life, is so critical. And I think it's why it is so important for others who are working in the space, particularly those who are coming into the new administration. And it is why the Cancer Moonshot was really created to be driven by the patient's needs, and having your voices and the voices of the community as a part of that was something that was a very critical part of how we operated at the Cancer Moonshot. So it is my hope that regardless of how this work continues in the next administration, that they continue to make sure that your voices are up front and center in that, because that is really the most important thing.
I 100% agree. I think, the real people are the ones that are going through this, are the ones that need to be heard the most.
Absolutely.
In specific things that we're doing now here in Wisconsin, it's like, you're working with legislators, they're doing things, the way that they have to do with lobbyists. And, my injection is, but you need to hear from the real people that this is affecting every single day, because I think that, I think all politicians can get very blinded to what's going on anywhere outside of their peripheral vision and what they're focused on or what they're laser focused on at that moment. And so everybody else, not that we don't matter, but at the same time, you can't hear it because you're focused on, this is what I'm doing, going forward with that. Now, I will say, and this is not to, kind of, I guess, say anything bad. I don't know how anybody could take it bad, but I know that your proof and evidence that real people can affect real work moving forward. And I say this because 2 years ago in DC, when we were stuck inside for CureFest because of the rain, your speech there caused you to break down and show real emotion as you were speaking about the work and these kids. And to me, it's like that proves that, like I said, politicians walking straight forward every single day, things are happening around them and all this stuff, and it doesn't affect them because they're so laser focused. But when you're in a position that the real stories and the people you see in the crowd can affect how you feel personally, because, we're we're proof and evidence that there's an issue right now that we have to focus on. And I take that as just showing that there's, how much we can affect the work and how much people need to put into their advocacy every single day. You have to prove that we're real people with real issues.
I mean, you're so right, Curtis. I mean, when I think about a community that has the greatest power, it is the pediatric cancer community. And it is because you are driven by that pain to see change happen, and it is relentless. And you and your community are the reason why it will change. And I if there's one thing that I can really impress upon your audience is that exactly what you just said, it's don't give up. If in fact, if anything, get louder. I know, one of the things that I struggle with the most about this work is that we place the burden, we place an additional burden on parents and patients to become the voice and to advocate. But it really is what is just so important in this work. And I am sure there are days that you or others in this community have just wanted to give up and just live your life. And because it's so difficult, and I'm sure you are reliving that pain every time you are having to share that story. So I get that, but the strength in what you do is what will change the system. And there is no greater power than this pediatric cancer community. That I can absolutely guarantee you. And you just need to continue. I wish I could take that burden off of you, but it is just really just such an important part of this work and why things will eventually change.
I agree. And, the thing is that you mentioned, you said a key word and it was relentless. And, it's a few months ago, I had it tattooed on my arm. And that one word is what we live by now, because there's no way ever that we will stop until something positive changes for our kids. And I say it now that we couldn't save JC, and it breaks our heart every single day that she's not here with us. But we move forward now to save everybody else that is going to be diagnosed or is currently fighting or is currently going through this. And we're working for them, and we will continue to. We're in DC. I'm in, we go to Madison there because we're in Wisconsin. Like, we're meeting with people trying to make things change. And it's never about recognition. It's never about accolades. It's never about any of that. Like,
Yeah, right.
I don't need any of that. I just want to make sure that our daughter and all these other kids get the respect that they absolutely demand, because what they've been through, I joke about it sometimes, but the man flu is real. Okay. We get sick. I'm on the couch crying about it, whatever, under a blanket. These kids are going through the worst time in their life.
Yeah.
And they do it with a smile on their face.
Yeah.
And they do it with grace, and they do it with dignity, and they worry about us. They want to make sure we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it's huge. And so that, to me, means that my work is not going to end. And my wife has often asked me the question: if you get this completed, this bill passed, will you feel like it's enough? The short answer is no. It just means that I've got to this point, which means I can go further.
Right. No, I get
so, and we will continue to push. And I want to ask a couple questions about the Moonshot program and things like that. But I want to ask, in the beginning, and depending on, I guess, everybody's position, was there ever a meeting or some type of communication with President Biden about why, like the actual why he wanted to start it, and not just kind of just an overview, but the story of why I wanted to start this and why it was done? And we're, for you to hear as far as a motivation to pursue that work.
I mean, the president impressed upon us all the time why we were doing this work. I have never worked for somebody where it wasn't just it wasn't politically motivated to try and, win votes with these constituents. It was an actual desire to see change happen. And any time we had time with either the president or the first lady, whether that was here in this administration or previously, it 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 was incredibly clear that he wanted things to improve for patients and their families. And it is something that he was relentless about and will continue, I'm sure, to be relentless about. His, the expectations that were set for us as a team and as a government, quite frankly, to see change happen was real. And we felt that all the time. And so in the White House, the president convened for the first time a cancer cabinet, which brought together over 20 different federal agencies and departments. And when those cabinet secretaries came to the meeting, they were really held accountable with the president at the table and him asking, what have you done and why are we not moving faster and what can we do to get us there? So he was 100% in on this work and the effort to do it. And we were reminded about that every day. If not through his words, then we felt it. We felt that urgency to make sure that we were doing as much as we could, as quickly as we could as well. So, I mean, it is something that will remain with me forever. This incredible privilege I had to have this job, but also the immense amount of responsibility we felt because the president and first lady had expectations to see change happen. So it was a very, very real thing.
Excellent. Now, specifically to that program, specifically to the last 4 years and even prior, what were some of the biggest roadblocks that maybe you felt along the way or the program felt along the way in actually getting to the level of achievement that was desired so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a personal standpoint, working in the government, certainly there are many steps one has to go through in order to get something done. I think there was always frustration in that we weren't being able to really kind of push through quicker than what we were doing, even though I think that what we were doing actually was moving way quicker than a lot of things in general. So I think when I think about the time there and kind of the work that we were doing, that to me is kind of something that stood out, was just the steps that needed to be taken in order to get something done. Now, I will say that those steps are designed to ensure that what we are doing is thought through completely, and that once we get to the other side of actually getting something done and through, that it has been designed and created in a way that works for the people of the United States. And so, we often had to remind ourselves that although sometimes there did seem like roadblocks and it did seem like it was taking time, that in actuality, it is because these things are so incredibly important, and we need to make sure that they are going to work for the American people, and that we think about the long-term consequences of some of these policies and actions that we're taking at the highest level, to make sure that there weren't unintended consequences for some of these actions too. So, these were big things we were moving, but I think at the same time, we always wanted to move quicker because, to your point, that sense of urgency and the need for change to happen every day, every second was real. And so to me, that was the biggest roadblock that we faced.
Sure. And I can certainly attest to things taking forever to get things through, and anything happening within the government takes a lot longer than you think it should. But, there's a lot of checks and balances, a lot of people to talk to and things like that. So I get it. It's definitely frustrating.
It is.
What specifically, and if you know the answer to this, what specifically happens to the Moonshot program now? Is it something that stays in place? Is it something that's sunsetted after he left office? And what exactly happens to it now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't actually have the answer to that. In terms of the physical team of the Cancer Moonshot and where we were in the White House, that no longer exists. But that doesn't mean that the work doesn't continue. And so what I will say is that from the very beginning, The strategy of the Cancer Moonshot was not to ensure that we existed as a little island in the White House that where everything was dependent on us. Our strategy was that if we didn't exist, the work would still continue. And so what we made sure of was that the many departments and agencies that I mentioned before that were part of this work, a really critical part of this work, that the programs and the funding that were required in order for us to meet those very audacious goals that the president set were set in place and will be in place for probably many years to come. So although we are physically not in the White House anymore, it does not mean that the work that started and the momentum that was created through this initiative does not continue forward, because it will. And it was designed that way on purpose so that regardless of who was in office, this work that was started will continue moving forward.
Excellent. Well, it's good to know. I mean, not that you're not there, but it's good to know that the work is going to move forward and continue, because obviously, whether it was 4 years, 8 years, or 10, it was a groundwork, and the infrastructure was put in. So now it's just a matter of, once again, drawing the brightest minds to be there to continue to move it forward. And hopefully that we'll continue to see that. Hopefully we'll continue to hear about it, that there are things moving forward. And what do you, I mean, on a personal level, what do you see as the future of cancer research moving forward? I mean, I know that everything right now is very politically charged, and I know that everything the world is coming unhinged, and I just want everybody to hug it out and get it along at this point. But what do you see as the future moving forward, kind of maybe just in our current state?
Yeah, so, just to share your vision there, I do feel we need to give this administration a little bit of time for the dust to settle to see exactly, where things kind of fall in terms of priorities. But from what I can tell and the way that we can see this, at least cancer research and the development of new therapies and treatments, I do believe we're in a very exciting time. And I do think that we are going to see a lot of innovation happen. I think that would have happened regardless of which administration was going to be in. I think we're going to continue to see the development of really personalized medicine, and that, the data that will come and will continue to come from genomics and understanding the molecular level of cancer will be incredibly important. And I think something that will really drive a lot of things moving forward. But then, of course, things like AI, which we know is starting to have a major impact already on the cancer world and cancer research, I think will only accelerate things forward as well. And we know already that with this new administration, that's going to be a key part of the work that they undertake. So it will be really interesting to see the developments that we'll see in the next few months and few years, because I think we are going to see many, and I think we're at a very exciting time when it comes to new innovations and technologies moving forward. The other thing that I'll just mention is our newest agency, ARPA-H, which was launched about 2 years ago through the Cancer Moonshot, which is really, was created to push forward on really audacious ideas that the NIH might not necessarily fund. I think we're going to see some really incredible things come out that are cancer focused through that agency as well. So I think stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot of excitement coming up in the next few months to few years around this.
That is kind of what we want to hear, right? That there's going to be movement forward. There's going to be things happening. And listen, we have, there's a lot of developments. And, each year when we're in DC and we're there for, CureFest, and we hear about these developments moving forward, we hear about, whether it's with Moonshot, whether it's with, let's say, NCORE, and their natural killer cell therapies that they're working on, and, which is incredible. And it's very bittersweet at the same time, for a lot of families out there, because we wonder, why didn't this happen sooner? But to see that type of thing, and yes, AI, I'm going to take it as kind of like social media. It's a love-hate relationship with,
It is.
and
It is.
And so, so we'll just have to kind of sit back and wait and see what happens. Unfortunately, I think a lot of views and visions and talking heads and things like that kind of take the Democrat, they take the political side of whatever is going on at that moment, and that gets kind of leached into how they feel about things. And like I said, I don't talk politics with people because it's hard for people to just be friends if they have differing views. But at the same time, I think you get the best conversations out of people that have differing views, because that's how we learn.
Absolutely.
And so, moving forward, listen, it's been like less than a month. I think we just have to kind of let things kind of iron themselves out. And it's just like going to a new job, moving into a new place. You're finding switches on the wall that don't work, and you're finding a different settling and meeting new people. And we just have to let things kind of work themselves out. And hopefully it all comes for the better. And like I said before, I'm an equal opportunity person when it comes to that. And if it goes the wrong way, follow my social media, because you'll see me calling people out for, not really focusing on what needs to be focused on. There was just a news story that I just got onto the other day about a representative that came out and said, I'm well aware that most pediatric cancer funding comes from philanthropy. I'm proud to have been, a part of a lot of that philanthropy within the research community. But at the same time, what you're doing is kind of telling us the quiet part out loud, that there's not enough money coming from the governmental side for our kids. And, whether it's 4% or 8%, depending on who you talk to, it's still a terrible number.
Yeah.
A terrible amount of money that comes specifically earmarked. And that's the biggest issue we have, both federal and local, is that when money is given to hospitals, money is given to research, it's never earmarked specifically for kids. It's earmarked for the community of cancers in general. And again, that's where we differ, because, we're only having a handful of drugs that are really designed for children is a huge problem. Because when you see firsthand what these chemotherapy drugs do to a child, I want that to, honestly, I want that to be the commercial. I really do. It's a hard thing to look at. It's a hard thing to see, but we've gone through it. And that, to see that reality, I think is what, aside from the words and the stories, to see the reality of what pediatric cancer really does to our kids, I think is what people need to see. Because when you can't look away and it's all around you, and you realize just how possible it is to be a parent like me, then that's when you start to listen.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it reinforces why this community and your voices are so needed and so powerful, because, there's kind of two instances. One is when you personally experience the pain, like yourself and your family, which, not everybody who works in the space or who is in a position of power is going to have that experience. And so the next closest thing is to be able to share those stories and the pain that you've experienced with them, so that they can understand, even if it is secondhand, just what you have been through and why this work is so critical. And that piece is under your control and your power to be able to share those stories. We tried really hard at the Cancer Moonshot to make sure that those stories were elevated, but I think you and the pediatric community does such an amazing job at making sure that your children's legacies and stories and their lives will never be forgotten. And we just need to continue pushing that as hard as possible, because that is the other way we can really start to affect the leaders who are in positions of power to see change happen.
Yes. And anybody within a position that, whether it's elected officials or in those higher positions with higher houses, you really have to, we often say too, that when you're going to politicians, like, the staffers are your best friends.
Yeah.
These are the people that have the politicians' ears. These are the ones that are making their appointments. Often, I would say sometimes more important than the politician themselves, because they're the ones that are pushing along policies or ideas or things that they think are going to be pertinent to
Absolutely.
really a career. And I mean, you'd be disingenuous at any point to say that, they're not always looking for what's going to keep me elected. But what's going to keep you elected, in my opinion, is stepping outside the box.
Mm.
Is really, when we have new politicians coming in, specifically to our state, I know the first thing I want to do is get them on the ground floor and say, I want you to take this role and I want you to take this message and run with it, because nobody else is.
Yeah.
And if you take it and run with it, people are going to start to wonder, why is that person outside the box right now? Maybe I should jump on board and find out why. And that's how we start change.
Yeah. That's true.
And that's what I think that's what our goal is right now, is to come in for these freshman senators and congressmen and women and assembly members and say, this is the cause I want you to follow. I don't want you on committees because it looks good on your resume. I want you on committees because you care about what the cause is.
Right.
Last year we went to CureFest and met with a representative from another state with friends of ours, and he had no idea why we were even there in September, had no idea what gold stood for.
Mm-hmm.
We all know what pink stands for, right? Like that's just kind of like it's just ingrained in your brain almost when you're born, you know what it means, but the gold it's so far and few between that anybody understands what it means. And that's just that coverage that we're looking for, that, not recognition. We just want you to know why we're there.
Yeah.
And so that's the biggest push, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That awareness and education is so critical. And it is made even that much more effective when it's coming from people like you who have experienced it, right? Because you can speak to the pain and you can speak to the experience, and you have ideas and you have solutions for the problems as well that you've experienced, I'm sure. And so that is just such a critical piece to this whole thing. And certainly, look, I mean, it's such a huge problem. We know cancer is still the second leading cause of death here in the United States. So it's not going away. And we need everybody on board. And I think one of the wonderful things about the Cancer Moonshot was that we were able to really galvanize not just the government and the government agencies, but also the private sector and the advocates and the patients and the parents. And when you are able to collectively unite that power together, that momentum that you create is just really starts to become unstoppable. And I think that was the power of the Cancer Moonshot, was that collectiveness and that unity. Because, to your point, childhood cancers are rare, but when you collectively pool all the rare cancer patients together, they all of a sudden are not rare. And that's where you get your power from, because all of a sudden it's not just one or two, but an entire community who is rallying for change here. And I think that's what you guys do so well as well.
Yep. And that's the biggest, I think that's the biggest thing that is a detriment to our community is people thinking that it's not a problem, not an issue. And I've said before too, that to be honest with you, if you walk outside of your house right now and go 10 houses down on both sides, you will find at least one person that is either going through pediatric cancer or has a connection to it. Mm-hmm. We have it here, and we had people that literally lived around the corner from us. We had no idea until after our daughter was diagnosed, and we went through Make-A-Wish, and then we figured it out. So it's closer than anybody thinks that it really is. And if our elected officials were actually in DC when we were at CureFest, you would see this mass of people. Last year, it was huge. It was bigger than I had ever seen it. And the thousands and thousands of people that gather for this event, we're there because we're a family. We're there because we're a community. And like you said before, this is the strongest group of people that I've ever been a part of. And we don't want to be a part of this community. We don't want to be a part of this group, but I would go to the ends of the earth for any of them at this point.
Right.
And if I can use my voice, whether it's through this, whether it's through social media, or whether it's standing on the steps of the Capitol to ensure that something happens, that's what I'm going to do, because that's the legacy that my daughter left behind for me, was to continue this mission and to ensure that when she told me that she was okay, that I know that I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And that's what we're going to do moving forward. So I'm excited for what the future is going to bring. I'm excited for the opportunities and the change, administrations aside. If there's new people, new ideas, new eyes, maybe something changes, maybe it goes good, maybe it goes bad, but we're never going to know until we give it a shot. So hopefully we'll see positives moving forward. So I would ask you then, because you said, well, you're not there now. What is your future moving forward now? So where do you
Yeah.
go from here?
That's a great question. And I'm still trying to really kind of get clarity on that, to be honest. I mean, if there's one thing that I do know, it's that I want to ensure that I continue doing whatever I can to have a role in this work moving forward and to take everything that I've learned and the connections and the networks that I've been able to establish and use them for good in the future. But what that actually looks like is still to be determined. So I'll keep you posted as soon as I know more.
That'd be awesome. I mean, I hope that we continue to see you in this space, essentially just kind of using your voice and really the experience. Experience. I think life experience a lot of times I think really kind of gets one over on educational experience, because when you're living it every single day. I had an argument, and take it for what you want, with somebody at one point when they said, "Do you think you're smarter than a doctor?" And I said yes, not in a book smart sense. I said yes in a life experience sense. And I said it because when my daughter was diagnosed, my wife and I were caretakers 24/7, 365. We never got to clock out and go home.
Yeah.
You never got to take a break from any of that. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world to have that time with her. But I say it because, when you're going through that experience, or whether you're going through, you're living the experience in the White House and through that initiative, and seeing and meeting the people, and kind of seeing how, one administration versus the next kind of handles things. That experience, I think it really kind of takes on a bigger role than this is what my education is. Now, there's nothing to say anything bad about what your education is or anybody else's, but when you live it, it's so much more intense, because now you can put it, you're never going to learn in a classroom what you learned on a daily basis from these families.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is why I will continue to advocate for patients and parents at the center of every solution that goes forward, because, of course, we need the expertise and the experience of the scientists and the doctors, but the most critical piece to me is the patient voice, is the parent's voice, is the caretaker's voice. And we learned so much through those conversations at the Biden Cancer Moonshot that, those conversations forever changed my life. And I will never be the same person because of that, and hopefully a better person because of that. And I'm just incredibly grateful for you and what you have done and what your family has done in the face of immense pain, and the strength that you've exhibited in what you have done for this community and what your community does as a whole is invaluable. And I know you don't hear it all the time, but I hope that through this message, through with you and your audience, you do recognize that your voices do matter and they do contribute to the change that's being made.
And I can say that for myself and for the rest of the people in our community that I appreciate you saying that, because it is far too often that I believe that we're told to just quit and just give it up because it's not worth it, or your one voice isn't loud enough and you're never going to make a difference in your lifetime. And unfortunately, yes, we have heard that, and I've heard it multiple times, but I actually like hearing the word no. I like hearing the word it's not going to work or stop, because it makes me want to work that much harder to prove that this is why I didn't stop.
Yeah.
This is why I didn't give up. Because the reality of it is, I have two older daughters that, we have a responsibility to and continue to watch them grow and achieve and everything like that. And it's hard to see them go through milestones knowing that JC never will.
Yeah.
But that motivates me to say, I want to ensure that they have the best life possible, that JC's name is continued to be pressed across any type of news story, airwaves, whatever, that her name is always said, and that all these children's names are said, because
Absolutely.
it's so important. The life that they led and our warriors that are fighting, the life that they lead is so incredible that how could we not stand up and speak for them and fight for them and give them the opportunity to be heard? I think it's an incredible disservice to not allow them to speak. And like you said, that I think that often within science and medicine, I think you get focused on the research, you get focused on the numbers and the data, and things like that. But I think a lot of people lose sight of where that data comes from. And it's from real,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? When you become a patient number, then I think you kind of lose it all. And so to have those parents, allow them to speak, allow them to tell their stories, allow their kids to speak, that can be the most moving thing ever. And even being part of this, I still get choked up every time I hear another kid, another advocate, a small child that is talking like a 40-year-old person and just, telling their story. And
Yeah.
it's moving
Yeah.
because
100.
they're living it, and that's where real data comes from. So I'm glad to hear that had such a massive impact on anything that was done.
Well, I will also say, I often say that my greatest superpower is being underestimated, because I think the strength that comes from that, and I feel like we're talking on the same path here, is that the strength behind being underestimated leads to what is tattooed on your arm, right? And that's just being relentless. And that is where change happens. That is where it happens. And we have you and your daughter and your family and this community to thank for that, because you show up every day. And that's probably the biggest gift that we could ever get.
Absolutely. I agree. And it's definitely tiring. It's tiring and exhausting work because we do kind of get pushed to the side a lot and we do get told no a lot. But like I said, that just pushes us to move that much harder and that much faster and not allow people to, I often tell people, when I'm talking to kids or things like that about, advocating, I say sometimes the best thing you can do is just be annoying. And you know what I mean? And if that means, your politicians, whatever, they've got phones and they've got emails and their staffers got, and if you've got to be annoying to the point where they're like, fine, I'll meet with you, then that's your in, and you know what, you've done it. And there's nothing wrong with that because, again, that you go back to that being told that you're average because, you don't understand this or you don't understand that, or because I don't have an MD at the end of my name or a PhD or something like that, so I can't understand things. But that life experience has led me and our community to understand things a lot deeper than people give us credit for. And yes, I can list off chemo drugs and we can list off side effects and therapies, and, our kids, instead of learning their ABCs, could also list the same chemo drugs, the side effects, how to spell them, how to say them. They know when the schedules are. They're doing all of this type of stuff at such a young age. They deserve our respect. They deserve our voices, and we will continue to do that. It's forever motivating to know that it's affected somebody out there, that they can tell me your words have affected us. It's not as prevalent as when people say your daughter has touched us in a way that we'll never be able to tell you, but to know that we're getting some recognition for what we're doing in their honor, that means we're on the right path. And I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate anybody that hears it and knows that it's not just some average dad out there making noise, that we're trying to do something important for our kids.
Absolutely. Most important average dad ever. I will say that. Your voice is critical, and just thank you to you and your community for everything that you do every day.
I appreciate it, and we're gonna continue to do it. I will ask you this: when we get towards the end of an episode, I always ask my guests to give advice, kind of advice to the community. When I interview organizations or parents, it's kind of give advice to somebody that's going through it from your end, what you saw. You have a different perspective from, the research, the science world, and from, the political world too. What is your advice to our community, advice to even to our warriors that are going through this right now thinking, nobody sees me?
Well, my advice would be to step into your power, to recognize and believe that your voice is critical, because it is, and to use it. And I think the example that I often come back to, and I think you touched on this just a little while ago, was that, to be relentless in your outreach is so important. And I know that there were a couple of times when we were communicating where you would email me or send me a message and you were like, I'm so sorry for emailing again, but just wanted to remind you or something. And I was like, don't apologize, because what you've done is you've just, re-upped that in my crazy inbox that sometimes things get lost in. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking about it and I can do something, right? So never think that you are being annoying. You are being a voice that is desperate to be heard and needs to be heard. So don't ever feel like you are taking somebody's time, or that you don't deserve that, or you kind of shrink back and be like, I got to give them some space and time. You need to step into your power, because it is the most important thing in this community. And I would just tell everyone who's listening to trust their voice and know that their voice is carrying such incredibly and important knowledge and expertise and advice that we need to hear. So don't ever give that up. In fact, just push forward harder, because it is the most critical thing that we can have in this community.
And I think that is fantastic advice. Again, I know that I did it. I know that I will apologize in emails and messages and stuff like that. At the same time, telling people be annoying, and I'm trying not to be. It's kind of contradictory, but that's just, it's my nature in a way. I want to have a good relationship, and I don't want to seem like a gnat at a barbecue, but but we have to. And so it's great advice. And again, everybody, that if you're looking into this world as to be an advocate or speak up for whatever your cause is, just push through it and ensure that your voice is heard no matter what. You're going to get back the effort you put into something.
Yeah.
And the reality is, no matter what your cause, whether it's pediatric cancer, whether it's something else, if you've got a message and you've got a voice and you want something to be told, then go out there and tell it. And when you're told no, tell it again.
Absolutely.
And you will be, okay? You will be told no. Doors will be closed in your face, and opportunities will go away, and people will promise things and it won't come through. It's part of the process. And I don't want to say trust the process, but it's part of it.
It is.
And you will get there. If you have the drive to do it, you will get to your goals. I promise you.
Absolutely agree with you.
Is there anything else that you would like to share or talk about that maybe I missed or glossed over?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I just to reiterate, I do feel optimistic about our futures. And I hope that your audience feels that too, in terms of the way things are moving forward and the opportunities that we have in front of us. It can sometimes be hard to see that. Coming out of the White House and having had an ability to kind of see and be like looking at it from a 30,000-foot level, there is a lot to be optimistic about. And I think we will continue to see gains in this community in the coming years as well.
I agree, and I look forward to it, and I look forward to hearing what your future holds, and what a voice you will be for both this cause and whatever other causes that you decide to push for. And I know it will be great. So I appreciate so much you taking the time to talk to me and giving me an opportunity to kind of get some insight into things that maybe people don't get to hear all the time, and the value that you absolutely had and have within our community, and what you've done for us. And I hope that we at some point can run into each other, because we will be in DC several times this year. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to run into each other.
I am looking forward to that. You just let me know and we'll make it happen.
I will do that. Thank you so much again. I look forward to everything we've got moving forward with the current life that we have and things out there. And I hope the developments turn into something positive. Thank you so much once again. And we will see everybody else next week.